I'm going to explore simplicity. It all started with something that wasn't supposed to really be an exercise in simplicity, but after this experience I had, I thought that was really an adventure, and it was something that brought joy to me. And so I'm going to share something about that, and then maybe invite you to choose your own adventure in simplicity at the end of the talk. I just want to start by sharing a thought that I have, that it's not a few of us actually struggle with food. So just to invite you to consider if you experience challenges with food, and that could be restricting what you eat or struggling to stop eating, this particular sort of exploration of simplicity might not be the first step towards freedom for you. I've struggled with food during my life, and I just wanted to start by saying this has been one step for me that's come a bit further in my freedom. But if it's something that you struggle with, I'd really welcome you to come and talk with me about that. So recently I did a fundraiser which is called the Ration Challenge. Has anyone heard of that? It's organised by Act for Peace, which is a long-standing charity in Australia, and they work on both sort of short-term emergency relief projects and longer-term development projects in places in the world that are affected by conflict. And what the fundraiser involves is living for 1 week on very, very basic food, which is similar to the rations provided to a Syrian refugee living in a refugee camp in Jordan. So you sign up, and I was part of a team, and then they send you this, I wouldn't even call it a box, it's really a carton, and all of your food for the week, except a little voucher that you're given to buy some extra rice, fits in this small carton. And when I opened it, I was quite daunted and quite amazed by the food that people live on for a week. So it's a kilo bag of rice, a handful of lentils, a handful of chickpeas, and sardines for the meat eaters, and a recommendation that if you're vegetarian, it's about 1.5 inches of tofu, so it's not much. And you get a tin of kidney beans as well. And so over the week you live on this food, and it's necessary to be quite careful and make sure that you're spacing things out so that you can get through the day and through the week and have enough nourishment. So by the end of the week, my team of 6 had raised $900. I had raised 900, and my team had raised close to 4,000. And I was really moved by the generosity of people. Some people in the Sangha here as well donated. And so it was, I think it illuminates good fortune when you can engage in a fundraiser like that and recognise the benefit that you can contribute, but it just highlighted for me that the fact that I found it sort of a joyful experience indicates that generally I enjoy good fortune. So the experience gave me quite a fresh understanding of these guidelines, these precepts that we chant here. And I've been thinking, well, why did I feel so joyful that week? And why did I feel a sense of little sense of loss at the end of the week. And I think it's because of these beautiful qualities of stillness, simplicity, and contentment. And since then I've been thinking that rather than sort of 3 separate pillars, those qualities are really more of a web, and they connect with one another. So I'll explain a little bit how I think that is so. That week I experienced a stillness of mind, which was because there were limitations on what I could plan about or scheme or fantasize about. So there was stillness of mind, and I think often I, and others I know, are frequently drawn into thoughts about planning what we're going to eat, or trying to get enough of this and enough of that, but not too much of this and not too much of that, and are we getting enough exercise? And, it can be quite laborious sometimes. And because the food was so limited, I actually had to slow my body down as well. I didn't ride to work as I normally do. I walked more slowly. Everything slowed down a little bit. And what happened is not just stillness, there was contentment as well. And, we all, I think, live with preferences, but with fewer choices, I felt that my preferences were less activated. There was less energy behind them, and there was a freedom in that. So I've been looking into the science of choice a little bit since then, being curious about why was this so joyful. And I found a psychologist by the name of Barry Schwartz who wrote a book, The Paradox of Choice. And that book is subtitled Why Less is More. And he sort of outlines the suffering that arises from having abundant choice. And apparently, according to the research, having some choice is very supportive of our well-being, and I would certainly like people living in these impacted places in the world to have greater choice. But if we have too much choice, it decreases our well-being. It's not supportive. And I think that's because there are parts of us that really think, if I make the right choice, on the other side of that right choice is going to be greater happiness. And I think this is true sometimes, even if you're at Greenfield's restaurant and you're choosing between pad thai or Singapore noodles, there's a little part that thinks, but I better make the right choice, because then I'll experience some sort of happiness. And I think this simplicity is a little act of rebellion. It's interrupting that expectation that by making the right choice, there will be happiness on the other side of it. Another thing I noticed during that week was I was noticing more around me, and this was particularly clear on the Tuesday, which was quite early on in the piece. But I had a shared lunch with my work colleagues. We come together from time to time to have big planning days, and this was one of those days. And I've created a bit of a tradition where on those days I'll buy some beautiful Dutch cream potatoes, nice big ones, and double bake them so that the skin's really thick and crispy. And then everyone on my team brings different toppings, and there's sort of a festive atmosphere to it. And on this particular day I was doing this challenge, so I was the only one of the 8 of us who wouldn't be partaking. but I prepared the potatoes, and then I heated up my little shallow puddle of dal and some white rice, and sat there at the table, which was covered in these beautiful baked potato toppings like bean stews and avocado and homemade chili sauce. And I just remember sitting there and feeling so delighted by the faces of my workmates and watching them put together, you know, their potato, and enjoying the colours and the smells, and even enjoying the sweet sort of way people would ask to be passed different things. And I sat there and I thought, oh, I wouldn't be delighting in this as much if I were concerned about getting my bits. I felt free to really enjoy just the presence and the beauty of the food and the offerings that people were making. And I think it's probably one of the most memorable meals, but I didn't actually eat it. So there was joy in that. And outside of that as well, I just found as I was going to and from work, just noticing more around me with my mind not as occupied as it normally is with food. So another beautiful quality of simplicity, I think, is the way that it can guide our way when we feel lost, which happens frequently. And I was recently introduced by Siladasa, who's one of the order members here, to the story of Mahapajapati Gautama, who was the Buddha's aunt and foster mother as well. And she was a dedicated follower of the Buddha, but then she'd gone through a period where she was away from him for quite a long spell. And she found she'd become a bit lost and a bit confused about what is the Dharma really? What are the teachings? What am I supposed to be doing? So she travelled to where the Buddha was staying so that she could ask him straight up. And she asked him, what is your Dharma? And the Buddha laid out what I think are actually really quite clear guidelines to support her. And there's a fuller account of it in this book, which I really recommend. In this section, The Path to Enlightenment, it's by Sangharakshita, who's the founder of the movement here. But I just thought I'd share the guidelines that are relevant to this exploration of simplicity. So the Buddha suggested that we need to know for ourselves what leads to dispersal, not to amassing, what leads to frugality, not to luxury, what leads to detachment, not to attachment, and what leads to content and not to discontent. And to put that in the context of our time and place, I have a sense that when we are content with less, we are treading more lightly on the earth, which is important in this time of environmental crisis. And I think it also means we're more likely to part with our resources, which relates to the dispersal element of that story. We're more likely to share our good fortune with others. And I think sometimes as our contentment grows and our grasping lessens, meditation becomes more delightful. I found myself really looking forward to meditation that week, when normally I might feel a bit weary and be resistant towards it. But there was a sense of delight that week, which was a surprise to me. And another teaching that I thought connected to this experience comes from the Karaniya Metta Sutta. And in that sutta, the quality of being easy to support is named as one of the desirable qualities of a meditator. And in the social context of that time, spiritual practitioners relied on the generosity of the lay people around them so that they could give over all of their energies to their meditation, their teaching, and their study. So it was really best if they had few resources because they were, few preferences because they were relying on the generosity of others. But I think for some of us, we're supporting ourselves, many of us, and practicing, so we can ask ourselves, how could I be easier to support so that I can give myself more over to spiritual practice? And the last theme I'd like to share is the theme of renunciation, which isn't a particularly, unlike simplicity, I think renunciation sounds a bit like, ooh, what are you asking me to give up? But Sangharakshita said that the Dharma is whatever helps us to rise up from wherever we are now. And I love that. I especially like the word rise because I think there's a sort of a dignity about it that feels almost, when I'm meditating and I notice myself getting caught up in circular planning, scheming thoughts about food or fantasies, when recognition arrives and I am able to let go of that, there's almost a sense in my body of rising above that. And I think it's easier to rise, to be uplifted by the Dharma when we're not clutching to everything that we think that we need. But it's natural, our mind is so used to working on getting what it thinks it needs that we might need to sometimes have these little rebellious strategies that show us a different way so that we can rise up and be uplifted by the Dharma. I think some of us might have experienced this on retreat when there's less going on and there's more simplicity. We might have experienced a sense of being uplifted by our practice or uplifted by the Dharma. So it can be helpful. I've found it helpful to ask myself, what is it that I get caught up in trying to gain? And is there some sort of way that I can interrupt that? So Sangharakshita also wrote that there is no single uniform of renunciation. So he said, no one has the right to say that because someone has not given up this or that thing, they are not a practicing Buddhist. Different people will give up different things first, but the net result must be the same, to make life simpler and less cluttered. And that's why I would recommend a sort of a choose-your-own-adventure approach to simplicity, because it will be different for everyone. But I think the question is around what would free up your energy to practice more wholeheartedly, whether that be practices of generosity, practices of meditation, study. So I did feel a little bit overwhelmed when the ration challenge ended, which I hadn't expected. I had sort of expected this grand feeling of, look at all of the delicious things that I can eat again now, but I felt a bit overwhelmed. And with that in mind, I've been trying to bring some of this simplicity into my regular routine a bit more. Very basic things. I'm a lover of porridge, and over the years I've developed a very elaborate sort of porridge regime where the porridge itself is quite simple, but it seems like every 6 months I pick up a new topping that I really love, and then you wouldn't believe the things that are on the bench, a little shake of that and a little scattering of that and a little dribble of that, and it ends up being this sort of complicated thing, but I want to have all of the fancy toppings. And I've noticed myself doing that on retreat too, where there's things I don't have at home, so trying to load up. But I've now got a very small personal precept, which is that I have 2 things on top of my porridge. And that's new. That's happened since the ration challenge. And if I want something different, then I can have that tomorrow. I've also made a bit more of a habit of making a big pot of soup at the start of the week, and I'll just have that every day for lunch and share it at work if there's people who haven't bought their lunch. Previously, I think I was a little bit more set on variety, having different things for lunch. And I did for 1 week only buy enough groceries to fit in a box, not as small a carton, but that's what I used to cook dinner. So I'm still sort of experimenting with how I can draw simplicity into my everyday life. So just to finish up, I thought that I would share a poem by Sangharakshita. And I discovered this in a retreat hut in New Zealand, and I was quite delighted by it. I won't share the whole thing, but some of my favourite lines. And then there'll be a little bit of time for some questions as well. So this is Sangharakshita's Verses of Acknowledgement. Lines written on receiving from a member of the Western Buddhist order, which is what this order used to be called, on the gift of his record collection. So a friend of his had given him his record collection, and this was his thank you poem. Though one's food is not perfect, it is enough to maintain health and strength. Though one's house is not perfect, it is enough to shelter the body. Though one's job is not perfect, it is enough to make both ends meet. Though one's morality is not perfect, it is enough to make meditation possible. Though one's meditation is not perfect, it is enough to support flashes of insight. Though one's insight is not perfect, it is enough to reveal the emptiness of mundane existence. Though one's guru is not perfect, he is enough to show one the right path. Though one's generosity is not perfect, it is enough to loosen the bonds of attachment. Though one's vigour is not perfect, it is enough for daily practice. Though one's record collection is not perfect, it is enough to make an acceptable offering. Though one's verses are not perfect, they are enough to show one's sincerity. Though one's letters are not perfect, they are enough for keeping in touch. Though one's appearances are not perfect, they are enough for friendly recognition. Though this acknowledgement is not perfect, it is enough to show deep appreciation. So I thought we could maybe have an exchange of questions. I'm not sure what the best way around would be. Something that I thought might be nice to explore in pairs is to share whether you have had a positive experience of simplicity, and also to consider if there are any ways at the moment that you might be able to simplify some aspect of life to make yourself easier to support. Would you be happy to explore that? Okay. Have 5 minutes maybe? Yeah. Okay.
So your question was about finding some way we can simplify. I had positive experiences with food. I think of the case, for example, of being at monasteries where there's like specific time to eat and how good that was, because normally I have a bit bread. Also fasting, I found very hard, but something that had a positive effect, I think, on me. And I've been researching a lot about techniques for social change, and fasting is one thing that I'm using as a technique from climate change, doing like a climate fast. It's just inspired by how I'm quite shocked to situation. Wake people up. I was thinking about one area where simplicity has been really positive in relationships. I guess I used to be more like open in relationships, but last year I had a close relationship with one person, and that's been really beautiful to kind of go deeper with just one person. So that's something I want to keep going with. I think she does too. The other area that came to mind that I was simplifying is projects. Not too many projects at the moment. I need to start cutting some, or at least just like hold tight and then wait till they pass and then not accumulate more. I think at least practice that language, not taking new ones on.
Care deeply about things.
I'm so too enthusiastic for marriage. That's been too trouble. How about for you? What's an area that you want to simplify?
A couple of things come to mind. Currently having to drive the car quite a lot. And at first I was listening to it and some kind of like playlist roaming through, and just the last couple of days I've noticed that I'm not really listening to the down at all, and there's an opportunity to practice that I am not taking up and can take up, I think. So simplicity of sound in my heart, turning on new sound. Also struck by a sense of overwhelm on my first day off in the week, which is normally Friday. And it's sort of like, I could do anything today, and then I feel it would be helpful to just have a ritual that I do that I always honour, so that I'm not sort of thinking about what I should do all the time. So I think again, like paring back the choices. Or even having another period of a month where I try how that
So does it mean doing less of your day, or does it mean planning beforehand so you don't have to think about it on the day?
I think having it
Does it mean being spontaneous on the day and just doing it in a relaxed way?
I currently don't have I think what would be helpful to try is to have the first thing planned.
Okay.
Yeah.
The ritual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And have that be sort of like an opening that's sort of reliable and I know that's what I'm doing on a Friday. You don't need to think about it. And it's Friday morning tomorrow.
It's also like that.
Is it? Start in the same way.
Yeah, you can see it.
It's a bit different. Yeah. So what do you think you're doing via ritual?
Well, I think it would be good to go down to the Mary Creek and visit. Come back like sugar voice that's like, oh, you should stay in bed on the day off. But I actually love that time.
Sounds good. To look forward to. Yeah.
It's raining. I can put on my excellent rain jacket.
Are you still working?
Yeah, I just started a new role with them 2 weeks, but still working with them. I work with them as an intake worker. Yeah. And I'm about to start working as a new program at suicide prevention and very I've never practiced in a traditional OT role. This will be your first one. I'm really looking forward to it. But I really do feel strongly that through doing
Yeah.
and so to practice in that way.
Okay, I have to ask you some questions about it then. Occupational therapy is one thing I was thinking of setting. I'm a support worker with subject response in the valley. And I'm trying to figure out what would I could study that would help me work with most, and it would be fun. But yeah, I like occupational therapy. It's kind of broad. Yeah.
Just figure out like, and then I'll be like a fast. Like a wild dog going out. Like to lead a patch of cat or something. You know?
Might bring people back together.
Yeah, we can go like that.
Yoo-hoo! It's my bell. Maybe that would be good. Thank you. That was a really lovely din in the room. And so I just thought I'd offer, if anyone had any questions of me, we don't have much time left, but I would be open to that if you'd like.
That was a lovely talk, Kirsten, and it was really, really good.
Oh, thank you.
mean, it sort of touched on a whole lot of areas which I think probably can resonate with lots of people.
Oh.
And the thing about choice, in particular, that sort of being overwhelming when there's choice, and then sort of when it's pared back, there's that a free space for you.
Thanks, dear Charity.
Questions. So I was thinking, you were talking about how liberating it was when you were doing this week-long challenge to have so little food, so little to think about around food. And I was imagining if I were to do that challenge, perhaps all that little space would be taken up with anxiety about hunger and portions and time frames. So was that your experience?
Well, it was quite helpful because the folks at Act for Peace send you sort of guidelines on how you can spread out the food. So I mostly followed the guidelines, which include 3 meals a day and 2 sort of snacks. And I didn't actually experience hunger during the week because I would say there's enough rice allocated to provide enough bulk in the belly. So I didn't experience so much hunger as the food was very bland and the enchantment was taken away from the food for the most part. So I had snacks of just plain white rice, to keep me going. So fortunately, I didn't really experience long periods of hunger. Yeah.
I enjoyed what you said about choice as well. One of the devilish aspects of choice is regret, because if you can make a choice, you can make the wrong choice, and your brain can start to worry about that. What do you think of that idea? Do you think that's one of the reasons choice is an illusion?
I think so, because I think that our minds anticipate what might be good about choice and then ruminate in a similar sort of way about whether we've made the wrong choice. I think both in the direction of the future and the past, our minds have a tendency to get concerned with what if, and by eliminating some choices, I think the ingredients for regret and the ingredients for craving are not so much there. That was my experience. Yeah. Thank you for spending this extra time this evening exploring simplicity with me, and go well into the night.
Kirsten, can I just ask just before we close, because I think this is the first in a series of 3 talks that you're going to do, and I know that your next talk's not coming up for a little while, but did you want to just say a tiny bit about what you're thinking that your headers will be?
Yeah, I think the next Choose Your Own Adventure in Simplicity is probably around words. And as a lover of the Dharma and Dharma books, I have noticed that I will read a lot. So a new experiment is in spending time with small amounts of Dharma, small amounts of words, simplifying that aspect of practice and seeing how that goes. So that's what the next talk will be about.
Sorry, before we acknowledge Kirsten. Kirsten, I'd really like to thank you for your talk tonight. It was really interesting and informative. One thing that really struck out for me in your talk, when you were saying that you were going without, it tended to bring joy from you and generosity, which is a real moving forward in terms of your own practice. And in a situation where we are in our lives, where there's lots of choices, a lot of commercialism, consumerism, materialism, simplicity is really important because, as you said, it can free your mind and give you that stillness and contentment. So thank you very much for tonight, and we look forward to your next talk, which is going to be on around October the 18th, because we've locked that in already. So thank you.